Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Megillah, Daf Yud, and we are going to be starting from the Mishnah at the very bottom of Daf Testament Beis, discussing distinctions between the Mishkan in Shiloh and the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, just post those eras. So this is how the Mishnah opens, 3 lines from the bottom, Daf Tes Amud Beis. The Mishnah says, Ein bein Shiloh Yerushalayim, thank you very much. There's no difference between the Mishkan and Shiloh in Yerushalayim. Ela Shiloh in the Mishkan in Yerushalayim, in Shiloh, in the Mishkan in the Midbar. Ochlin kachim kalim u'maiser sheni b'chol haroeh. You were allowed to eat kachim kalim, more of the lightweight but holy korbanos. Those were allowed to be eaten, as well as maiser sheni, as long as you could see Shiloh, the Mishkan in Shiloh. But uv Yerushalayim, the only way you were able to eat these types of foods, the kachim kalim and the maiser sheni, was if in Yerushalayim, is if you're lifting min hachoma within a certain set of walls. Last line of Daf Testament Beis, still part of the Mishnah. V'kan, both in Shiloh and in Yerushalayim, kachim ne'echalim, the higher level of foods, can only be eaten lifting min haklayim within the curtains. And then Kedushas Shiloh, as it relates to the Kedusha with which the Mishkan was sanctified in the Midbar, there says the Gemara, top of Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, Yesh achareha heter. What does that mean, Yesh achareha heter? That there was a heter after Shiloh. So Rashi says, top line, Dibur Hamaschal Yesh achareha heter k'shecharva Shiloh hutru habamos. One was allowed to be makriv korbanos on a bama after the destruction of the Mishkan in Shiloh. There was a 57-year period between the destruction of the Mishkan in Shiloh and the building of the first Beis Hamikdash. During those 57 years, the Jews were allowed to bring korbanos on bamos. However, Ukdushas Yerushalayim, the Mishnah concludes, as it relates to the sanctity of Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash, Ein acharei heter. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then Ein acharei heter. There is no leniency for bamos. So today we're going to spend the bulk of the halachic piece of the daf today, the first amud. We're going to be discussing this din of whether or not it's appropriate to have had bamos after the Churban Yerushalayim. Can you have this kind of man-made pyre in order to bring korbanos after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? Our Mishnah clearly is not in favor. Ein acharei heter, one is not allowed to bring a bama. However, right out of the gates, the Gemara opens and says, Amar Rav Yitzchak Shamati shemakriven bebeis chonyo bizman hazeh, that we are allowed to sacrifice in beis chonyo. We'll discuss what that means in a minute. Bizman hazeh, even post churban. What is beis chonyo? Rashi, 4th line of the page. Dibur hamaschal beis chonyo mizbeach chonyo beno Shimon HaTzadik. It's the son of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik, as we'll learn later in the Gemara, was a Kohen Gadol, and his son, when he moved out of town, bana bama b'Mitzrayim l'shem shamayim. He built a bama post Churban, and people were using it. But we just said that post Yerushalayim, you're not allowed to have a bama. So we have to figure this out. So what does the Gemara say in response to this first line? If we see that Rav Yitzchak allows hakrava on a bama post churban kasavar, 2 things we can learn from here. Number 1, Beis Chonyo lav Beis Avodah Zarah. There were those who thought that Beis Chonyo had built a Beis Avodah Zarah. Obviously, Rav Yitzchak was of the opinion that it was not a Beis Avodah Zarah. And the second thing we learn, and now this is getting into the belly of the sugya, is the kasavar. He is of the opinion, Rav Yitzchak is of the opinion that kedusha rishona kidsha l'shaita below kidsha la'asid lavo. Let's discuss this concept because it's going to govern our understanding of the next amud. We know that at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, of course, that space had kedusha. We know, for example, that a person who's tamei meis, that they're not allowed to enter the Beis Hamikdash, and if they do, they have serious onshin. Even today, nowadays, we're very careful, or we should be, about going certain places on the Temple Mount. Not so pashut where you are allowed to go, where you're not. There are some markations there, according to some poskim, as to what you have to stand behind, whatever it is. But the point is that we know that when the Beis Hamikdash is around, that it's kidsha l'shaita. The question is that when the Beis Hamikdash was kidsha l'shaita, was it also kidsha la'asid lovo? Is the sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash as it was then same today? Did it change? Is it identical? Let's say there's a meter, 100% kedusha when there's a Beis Hamikdash, and post Churban that space is also 100%. Or do we say no? Or do we say that lo kidsha la'asid lavo is that there is no future there is no future of kedusha, and it only stops with the Beis Hamikdash. So these are the two possibilities. Now, this shita in the Gemara on Daf Yomi Amud Aleph, the shita of Rav Yitzchak obviously held that, of course, kitcha rishona, but then here's the chiddush part: is that kitcha l'shaita below kitcha la'asilavo, that it was not sanctified for the future. How do we know that it was not sanctified for the future? This is based on a pasuk 6 lines down. Tichsiv ki lo vasem ad ata el hamenucha ve'el hanachala. What does this pasuk mean? What is menucha and what is nachala? Menucha is a reference to Zo Shiloh, the Mishkan that was in the Midbar in Shiloh, that was in Shiloh. And nachala, what does the word nachala mean? Zo Yerushalayim. And the Gemara makes a hekish. Makish nachala menucha. There is what to compare between the nachala and the menucha, between Yerushalayim and Shiloh. Ma menucha yesh acharei heter. Just like by Shiloh, you're allowed to have a bama after its destruction. Af nachala yeshar acharei heter. So too by Yerushalayim, you're allowed to have a bama. So all of this fits within the framework of Rav Yitzchak, but it doesn't really make sense because our Mishnah said that after Yerushalayim is destroyed, ein acharei heter. So if our Mishnah says ein acharei heter, how can Rav Yitzchak say yesh acharei heter? How does that work? Very difficult. So Amrulay, they said to Rav Yitzchak, Amris, did you really say this? And he's like, Amr no, I didn't say something so ridiculous as to that thing that's quoted in my name. No, it wasn't me. I didn't say anything. Amar Rava Ho Elokim, you absolutely did. Amra, you said it. Ugmir no lamine. I heard it directly from his mouth. I know that Rav Yitzchak said this. He argued with our Mishnah. Umay time kahadarbe. Why did Rav Yitzchak pivot and say, no, really, I didn't say that? Says the Gemara, the reason Rav Yitzchak couldn't maintain his shita was because Mishum Kasha de Rav Mari. What was the question that Rav Mari asked? Rav Mari says, to Mosiv Rav Mari, Kedushas Shiloh Yesh Acharei Heter. He quotes our Mishnah. This is our Mishnah at the top line, that when it comes to Shiloh, Yesh Acharei Heter, we have a leniency to bring Korbanos on a Bama after the destruction of Shiloh for those 57 years between Shiloh and the Beis HaMikdash. However, our Mishnah concludes, Kedushas Yerushalayim Ein Acharei Heter. So how could Rav Yitzchak be of the opinion that we're allowed to bring a korban on a bama post korban? Hooray! The end of our Mishnah says black on white. It's very clear. In acharei heter. That's question number 1. And 1/3 of the way down, the Gemara says v'odin. Furthermore, an extremely explicit line, just like we had in our Mishnah. Tanan, we have a Mishnah that writes, Mishabau Yerushalayim. From the time that the Jews came to the Beis Hamikdash, obviously there was no Beis Hamikdash at this time. Ne'asru habamos v'lo haya lahem od heter v'hi haisa nachala. That is what nachala is. Nachala is not the nachala of the hekesh of above, where we're allowed to have a bama. There should be no bamas. So the Gemara rejects the shita of Rav Yitzchak outright. So let's just catch the flow here. Our Mishnah said very clearly that when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, you're not allowed to have any bamos. Rav Yitzchak comes along and says, when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, you are allowed to have korbanos, and then they torpedoed his shita out of the water. All done. Good. However, the Gemara says it's not so simple to just reject the shita of Rav Yitzchak, because really, Tanoihi, there's a machlokes Tanoim about what the halachic status is of Kedusha in the space of where the Mizbeach stood. If post-Churban, the Kedusha is just like it was before, then of course you're not allowed to have a bama, because it would be inappropriate to bring a korban anywhere other than the Mizbeach. But if that, now that's what we call Kidsha La'asid Lavo. But if it's low Kidsha La'asid Lavo, if the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash no longer is the same as it was before, then we should allow bamos. And we're going to see that here in this brisa, or at least we're going to try. Tanoi, the Gemara says the Tanya, but it's not correct. It's not a brisa. It's actually a Mishnah. Titnan, the Mishnah writes, Machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Shamati, I heard a rumor. Kishahayu bonin behechal. When they were building the Heichal, Osin Klaim Laheichal Uklaim Lazara. They put up curtains. Ela Shebeheichal Bonin Mibachutz. When they were building the Heichal, they had to build the walls standing outside of the space of the Heichal. Why? Because once you make the Heichal holy, you can't be in the Heichal unless you're the Kohen. That's not allowed. So that's why they would stand outside. So let's say that my Gemara was the space of the actual Heichal. So they wouldn't stand here and build it from within. They would come from the outside and say, that space is going to be holy. I can't stand inside and build. I have to put up the walls. I have to put up the walls out here and get them into the ground. That's how we have to build it. They had to stand on the outside because the Heichal was holy. Masha'en Kain, the Gemara continues, that Ube Azara bonin mi bifnim. when we speak about the Azara, which is a space that people are allowed to go to, we know there was an Ezras Nashim, there was an Ezras Yisrael, there were plenty of spaces that people could go, that they could build the walls even from the inside. So that's Shita number one. We will analyze this in a moment. Rabbi Yehoshua, seemingly in competition with Rabbi Eliezer, Shamati, I heard the opposite. I heard Shemakrivin, that you are allowed to be makriv, afal pisha ein bias. Even though there's no Beis HaMikdash, you can bring a korban in that space. And ochlin kadshe kachim, excuse me, you're allowed to eat even the holiest of korbanos, afal pisha ein claim, even though normally we can only eat them within claim, physical claim, but here we are still allowed to eat them. And kachim kalim u'maiser sheni afal pisha ein choma, they can be eaten in a space where the wall would have been. And why is it that Rabbi Yehoshua holds so leniently across the boards here? Now this is where we're going to get into the teeth of the sugya here. Mipnei, the reason why Rabbi Yehoshua says that you are allowed to bring korbanos, why you can eat kadshe kachim, why you can eat kachim kalim, is mipnei, a little bit more than halfway down, shekdusha rishona kitcha l'shaita. Of course, we know that the Beis HaMikdash was absolutely a holy space when it was built, but the kitcha l'asid lavo, the space of the Beis HaMikdash always maintains its kedusha, period. If we hold this way, and most of us are Tmei Meis, maybe with the exception of a Kohen, maybe, right? It's not so pasha. So if we are Tamei Meis and we go into the Beis HaMikdash, that's terrible. You're not allowed to do that. So if we do that now, and really the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash today is Kitcha L'Asid Lavo, it's exactly the same as it was then as it is now, so that's a big problem. And that's the Shita of Rabbi Yehoshua. So we see from Rabbi Yehoshua that he holds Kitcha L'Asid Lavo. And when you hold kitcha la'asid lavo, that also means that bamos are aser. Okay. Mechlal, what is implied from the shita of Rabbi Yehoshua? Mechlal, Rabbi Eliezer savar lo kitcha la'asid lavo. It must be that if that's how he's explaining his own shita, it must be that Rabbi Eliezer holds that lo kitcha la'asid lavo, and therefore, as the Gemara was trying to show earlier, it's not so simple to reject the opening sheet of Rav Yitzchak as we saw at the top of the Amud. We have a machlokes in the Tanaim as to whether or not we say that Kitcha L'Shaita was Kitcha L'Shaita only, or if it was also Kitcha L'Asid Lavo, machlokes Tanaim. So therefore, our Mishnah isn't so simple as being the only valid shita. Maybe Rav Yitzchak's also valid. Amrle Ravina the Ravashi. Ravina says to Ravashi, that's not right. That's not right. This Tanaic source, this Mishnah that you brought me, is not a good enough raya to highlight the fact that there's a machlokas between those who say that the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash is permanent versus those who say that it was only temporary at that time. Dilma, after all, maybe we could have just said, Tikule Alma, really maybe everyone holds Kedusha Rishona Kitcha L'Shaita, the Kitcha L'Asi Lavo. Maybe, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, the first Shita in the Brisa, maybe even he would say that the Kedusha is permanent. Umar Maidishmiya Lekamar, Umar Maidishmiya Lekamar, and people were just saying what they heard, but they weren't, as Rashi highlights over here. Take a look at Rashi, 12 lines or so from the bottom. Dibur Hamaskil, Umar Maidamashmiya Lekamar, V'lo Mishum Tzorech Kedusha. We weren't talking about Kedusha. You're making diukim in a space where you weren't meant to make a diuk. This Bryce is not talking about Kedusha. It's talking about some technical aspects of building. It says the Gemara, that's impossible, because what did we see about Rabbi Eliezer? What did he say about building the walls of the Heichal? Where did he say you have to stand? Outside the Heichal. Why? Why do you have to stand outside the Heichal? The Kedusha was always there, or the Kedusha was never there. Why do you have to stand outside the Heichal? So the Gemara says, claim the Rabbi Eliezer, according to your Shita, that they're not even talking about Kedusha, then why did he have to be so particular about where he was standing? So says the Gemara, maybe it was just there for the modesty that the Kohen should not do the avodah publicly. And therefore, we reject this Shita in the Gemara that there is a machlokes Tanaim from this previous source. So the Gemara says 2 lines before the wide lines on Yudam and Aleph, Ella, Kihani Tanai. There actually is another brisa that indicates that there is a machlokes in regards to whether or not the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash was permanent or temporary. Says the Gemara, Ela Kihani Tanoi de Tanyov, last of the short lines. Amar Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. Let's remember his name. It will come up again shortly. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi says, Lama Manu Chachamim Es Elu. If we were Talmidei Chachamim, we would know what this brisa is talking about. I had no idea what this is talking about, and I use Rashi and other sources to figure it out. We have a brisa that speaks about the world of Bate Arechoma. And the brisa here explains that the Chachamim articulated as Elu that there were 9 cities that were considered the cities that were Mukafos, Mimos Yoshua bin Nun. So why were they articulated? Why did we have to know about them? The reason was because Shekisha'alu b'nei Hagola, when the Jews came back up from the Gola, from exile, Matzu es elu v'kidshum, they had to re-sanctify these cities for the sake of Batei Arichoma. Aval Rishonos, all the earlier cities, Batlu Mishabat Haaretz, they didn't have their Kedusha. So if they had to come back and re-sanctify, what does that teach us? That it didn't maintain its Kedusha. Alma, what we see from here is Kasavar Kedusha Rishona Kitcha L'Shaita V'lo Kitcha L'Asid Lavo. We see from this Shita Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi is that the Kedusha wasn't permanent, because when the Jews came back, they re-sanctified the cities that were initially Kadosh Mimos Yeshua ben Nun. So says the Gemara, that's Shita number 1. The problem is that we have a stira. And who is the stira between? This author was Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Let's see who the new author is. Or Minhu, Amar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Same person's name, different shita. It's going to be a problem. V'chi elu bilvad hayu. Were there only these? This is the exact opposite of what we said. We said there were only 9. And this version of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi says, were there only these? We had over 60 cities that were Batei Arichoma. So that doesn't work. They're not the same thing. So Lama Manu Chachamim Es Elu. Why is it that the Chachamim detailed all of these 60? So it says the Gemara, Sheksha'alu b'nei Agola Matzu Elu v'Kidshum. The Brisa writes that they went up to re-sanctify them. But here the Gemara poses a big question on this shita of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Turning to the top of Yud Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Kidshum Hashda, what are you talking about? You couldn't have sanctified them right now. We said in this Brisa, but a little bit later, that there's no need for these to be kadosh. Ella, so the language of the Brisa has changed. Ella matu es elu uminaum. Below elu bilvad, ella kol shetala loch misores biyadcha me'avosecha. Any city that was shemukefes chama memos Yeshua ben Nun, any city at all, doesn't require kedusha. The halacha is as follows: kol hamitzvos halalu, any mitzvos that specifically apply to Yeshua ben Nun, to cities that are mukafos chama memos Yeshua ben Nun, mipnei shekdusha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha l'asi lavo kasha de Rabbi Yishmael ad Rabbi Yishmael. So we have we have a Mishnah and a Brisa. One of them indicates Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that Kitcha L'Shaita is only Kitcha L'Shaita, v'lo Kitcha L'Asid Lavo. And the next Brisa of the Shita of Rabbi Yossi is not that way. The next Brisa indicates the opposite, that it is Kitcha L'Asid Lavo. So how do we deal with this seeming contradiction? The Gemara provides 2 answers. Trei Tanoi Aliba Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, that really there were 2 Talmidim of Rabbi Yossi who didn't understand how to read these Brisas. And then the Gemara gives a second answer, which paints the picture that the Gemara was hoping to paint. And then I'll summarize. It wasn't Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, it was Rabbi Eliezer bar Yossi. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer bar Rabbi Yossi Omer, Asher lo choma. What does that pasuk mean? That afal pisha ein lo achshav, v'hayo lo kodem l'chein, reflecting the shita that even if there are no walls now, but there used to be, it still maintains its kedusha. So therefore, we have 2 shitas in the Tanaim. We have one shita that says Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi on the previous page was of the opinion that the kedusha was temporary. That's why in that previous Mishnah on the previous page, when they came back up, they had to re-sanctify these 9 cities. However, according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Yossi, he says no, kedusha is la'asid lavo, it lasts forever. So B'kitzer Nimratz, and then we're going to jump into a very long but very fast Agarata till the end of the page. It'll be pretty rapid from here on out. But B'kitzer Nimratz, we saw in our Mishnah one shita that the kedusha of Yerushalayim was ein acharei heter, that you're not allowed to have any heter at all. Seemingly, that's because the kedusha of Yerushalayim was permanent. Rabbi Yitzchak says that's not true. We allow for bamos, and then we saw 2 sets of machlokos tanaim to support this idea, and that is the summary of this page. We're going to move very rapidly through this brisa. We're starting right now on Yud Amud Beis, about 10 lines down at the 2 dots. Agarata. The Gemara says, "Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh." We know the opening pasuk of the Megillah Esther. And Amar of Levi v'Item Reb Yonasan davar ze mesoros b'yadenu mi'anshei Knesset Hagdola. We have a tradition from the leadership of the Anshei Knesset Hagdola that kol makom shene'emar vayhi, any pasuk that has the word in it vayhi in the beginning of the pasuk, einu ela lashon sar. That is bad news for the Jews. And here are some examples, a whole handful of them. Here, the first long line on Yud Amud Beis, the first one, vayhi b'mei Achashverosh haba Haman. The story of Achashverosh was not gishmak. The results were gishmak, but it was a very difficult process. So then says the Gemara, what's the next pasuk? Story of Rus, and after that, Habarav, there was a famine. Next, story of Noach, a lot of people in the world, and then what happened? People got bad. What happened with the people by the Dor Haflaga? They said, we're going to rebel against Hashem. And it said, Vayhi there also. It says, Vayhi. What was the result? Asu milchama. Bad news again. And then it says, we see Vayhi. And then what ended up happening in that story, he was presented by someone who had a sword. Bad news again. Vayhi, another presentation of Vayhi. Vayhi Hashem is Yoshua. And then the bad news took place, Vaymalu b'nei Yisrael. And then it said, Vayhi ish echa mina ramasayim. And what was the result of that? That Chana couldn't have any children. Story of her and Elkanah. When Shmuel was old, unfortunately, his children didn't follow in his pathways. And then another example, what I don't even know, I didn't count. What is this? 10. Yet, nevertheless, what was the result of that? Shaul was chasing after David. He was chasing a ghost. He was terrified about something, and he started chasing David. Next, so the king sat in his house. And then what ended up happening? David was told he wasn't going to build a house. All of these shitas are here to support one idea. The word vayhi at the beginning of the pasuk is not good. Says the Gemara, that's not true. And I'll give you a whole handful of examples where we see that vayhi is actually not so bad. So says the Gemara, says the Gemara of Haksiv, we're about a third of the way down on Yud Beis, 5-6 lines into the wide lines, last word on the line, Haksiv. And what does the Brisa say about those days? That day was like the creation of the world, an absolutely thrilling day. So says the Gemara, that's one pasuk. So we see a connection between the day of the creation of the world and the day of the Yimei HaMiluim. That's beautiful. Says the Gemara, it wasn't all beautiful. What ended up happening there? Hashachiv, Nadav and Avihu ended up getting killed with the Eish Zara. Okay, good point. 7 lines down in the wide lines, the Gemara says, but I have another example that was positive. That was a good pasuk. There's another one with Vayhi that works. And another one, the second day of creation, the third day of creation. There are so many examples where the word vayhi is not a bad word. So we started off this section by saying that, yeah, it's possible that vayhi is a bad word, but we said it's not so simple that it's a bad word. Then the Gemara clears everything up for us. We're more than 1/3 of the way down, almost halfway down, middle of the line, middle of the page. Amar Rav Ashi, you're right. Kol vayhi, when what the pasuk says is only the word by itself of vayhi, then ikahachi bi-ikahachi. Some are good and some are bad. However, vayhi bimei, when you have the combo deal of vayhi and bimei, like we started with, vayhi bimei achashverosh, those are very bad. Einu ela lashon tsar, that's where things are terrible. And chamisha, there are 5 of them. Chamisha vayhi bimei havu. There were 5 vayhi bimeis. What were they? Vayhi bimei achashverosh, vayhi bimei shvora shoftim by Rus, vayhi bimei Amraphel, vayhi bimei Achaz, vayhi bimei Yehoyakim. Those were the 5. So that's what the Gemara says, and that's the end of this section. And moving on, we're now going to learn 18, not all today. We'll learn the first 6 or 7 today. I think 6. We're going to learn 18 different short drushas that Rabbanim would give when they would stand up at the pulpit at the front of the Beis Medrash to give shiur. Let's get started. Says the Gemara halfway down. The Amar Reb Levi, Davar Zemesars bi'adenu mi'abosenu, Amotz ve'amatzia achim hayu. These 2 people were brothers. So what? Was this like the genealogy website? Who cares? Why are you telling me that they're brothers? So says the Gemara, my kamashmalan, what does this come to teach us? Says the Gemara, a huge yesod in tznius. Ki hada amar Shmuel bar Nachmeni, amar of Yonasan. Whenever there is a woman, a married woman, who's modest in the home of her father-in-law, so you're staying at the in-laws, and she stays perfectly modest, that woman will merit having children who will be kings and prophets. Minalan, how do we know? Mitamar. We know from the story of Tamar. It's a very strange story and we may have just glossed this over, having seen the pasuk so many times, but it stands out. Let's translate this pasuk. Yehuda saw her and thought that she was a prostitute because she covered her face. Now, I'm no expert in the business, but from what I understand, these women are usually scantily clad. They are not covering their face. They're more revealed, if anything else. So what in the world is the basic pshat in the pasuk and Chumash? A zona is not someone who's known for her modesty. So what's happening here? Because she was covered, he thought she was a zona? No, listen to this, just unbelievable. Mishum dechisa sapaneh be'achshvel azona should have been the opposite. Says the Gemara. Ela mishum dechisa sapaneh beveis chamia, because when Tamar was in her father-in-law's house, Yehuda didn't know what she looked like. He didn't know what she looked like. So then when he saw her with her face uncovered, did not know it was Tamar. He had no idea who she was.
Oh, so you're saying when he was at the crossroads and saw her face was uncovered at that point?
Yeah, he was referencing, I didn't know it was Tamar because I've never seen her before. She was in my house, but I never saw her. She was so modest. So pshat in the pasuk is the flip of what it looks like. It looks like, this woman is standing at the parashas drachim. She's a zona because her face is covered. That doesn't make any sense. So obviously what must be going on is what the Gemara says, Mishum dechisis sapaneh beveis aviv v'lo haba yad Allah. And therefore, therefore, Tamar was zocha to kings and prophets. Who were the kings? Malachim David. Through that line of David, there were kings. And Nevi'im Damar of Levi Misaris Biadenu Me'avosenu Amos V'Amatzia Achim Hayu. This is why we quoted this line. Uchsiv Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amoz. Amoz had a Navi come from him, and Amoz was part of this family of Tamar. Beautiful, beautiful Dvar Torah for Tznius, although it does pose a little bit of a question because in halacha, we Jews don't have a requirement for women to cover their faces. That's true in some sects of Islamic law, but it's not true across the boards. It's certainly not true halachically. There's no need for. I saw a woman here in Jewel. Yeah. This happened to me 2 years ago. I was standing in Jewel. I was standing in line, and I hear this phrase "Shalom Aleichem." I picked up my hat. I didn't see anyone. I didn't know who said it. And this woman was standing there. I mean, like mamish, just her eyes. She's like, "Why you don't respond when someone says Shalom Aleichem?"
Why was she talking to you anyway? She's so good start.
Right? I didn't say that back to her. I'm like, "Oh, Aleichem Shalom." I had no idea.
When you drive through Beit Shemesh, there's a large community there.
I've heard. I heard rumors. Yeah. But it's not halacha l'mais. It's not Shulchan Aruch anywhere. We don't have such halacha to cover one's face. But this was what happened with Tamar.
Maybe they're Tamar descendants.
But they're not malachim and neviim. That's for sure.
I thought it was Asr to cover Tamar's problem. No?
Asr to cover your face.
Nowadays,
Asr, halachically.
I
don't think so. Next, otherwise women couldn't wear masks during COVID. It would cause for some serious political issues, Next, the Gemara says halfway down, another thing that is a Mesorah from our forefathers. Makom Aron enu min hamida. The Aron, as we know, sat in the Kodesh HaKodashim. However, it had 0 footprint. Even though it had measurements to it, it had 0 footprints. How do we know? Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa writes as follows. Aron she'asa Moshe yesh la eser amos l'chol ruach. The room was only 20 by 20. And the Aron sat in that room. Yet from one side of the Aron going south, there was 10 amos. And from the other side, there was 10 amos. The Aron was in the middle, but the whole room was only 20. So how do you have a room that's 20 amos, something sitting in the middle that takes up space, yet there's 10 amos on each side of that thing that takes up space? It's a nace. That's what the Gemara says, that it was a nace. We know that that room was only 20 amos. And as well, we know the space was a certain width because uchsiv knaf hakaruv ha'echad eser amos, uchnaf hakaruv ha'echad eser amos. So therefore, how is it possible? How did the math work? Says the Gemara, Lav shma mina b'neis ha'omed. It must have been like the ultimate optical illusion, where let's say you would count 10 steps, your 10 amos. You could walk the 10 steps, but the Aron physically took up space. And on the other side of the Aron, you could also walk your 10 amos. It's just pile plaim. It's a nace. It's hard for us to fathom. That's what the Gemara says. Rav Yonasan Pasach la Pischa lahai Parsha Samehacha. When he would start talking about Megillas Esther, here's what he would say: V'kamti alehem v'hichrati leBavel. I'm going to destroy and cut down Bavel. Shem u'she'er v'nin v'neched ne'um Hashem. Hashem said that these 4 things will be destroyed about Bavel. What are they? Shame is that there is no more a Babylonian people. Shame zehaksav. So shame means. Let me start over. Shem zehaksav. This is their language. Their written alphabet. She'er is a lashon. This is the spoken language. Nin is a reference to Zem Malchus, to their kingship. That's gone. The Neched Zuvashti, all the descendants of Vashti died with her. Okay, that's how he opened up his conversations. Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani pasach la pischa lahai parsha samehacha. He would speak about Megillah Esther as follows. Famous pasuk: Tachas hana'atzutz ya'aleh v'rosh, v'sachas hasirpad ya'aleh hadas. What are all of these terminologies? What's tachas? In place of that na'atzutz was replaced with birosh, and in the place of the sirpad was replaced hadas. So let's learn each one separately. Right before the Tosfos in the top line, before the little insert of Tosfos. Tachas hana'atzutz. Who was the person referred to as na'atzutz? That's tachas Haman harasha. She'asa atzmo avodah zara. He made himself into avodah zara by making others worship him. How do we know that na'atzutz is a language of avodah zara? Tichsivu v'chol na'atzutzim v'chol na'halulim, which is a pasuk that speaks about avodah zara, and we see na'atzutzim is used over there. So he was out. That's what we said. Tachas hana'atzutz. To replace him, ya'aleh v'rosh. What is Ya'aleh v'rosh? Zeh Mordechai sheninka rosh l'chol besamim. He was the person in charge of all of the besamim. Shenemar ve'ata kach l'cha besamim rosh Mordoror. U'metargamin, and the targum of the pasuk of Mordoror is Mordachi, Mordechai. So that's how we see a reference to him as Rosh Besamim. So that's why Ya'aleh v'rosh is a reference to Mordechai basically taking over for Haman. Let's continue in the pasuk. Tachas hasirpad, that's Vashti. Tachas Vashti harisha'a, who was Baspino, the granddaughter Shal Nebuchadnezzar harasha. And what did he do? Shesaraf refidas beis Hashem. He burnt down the structure of the house of Hashem. Look at the play on words. What did the pasuk say? Tachas hasirpad, saraf refidas, sirpad. That's a little bit of a notricon. Those two words are connected. Tichsi refidas sozahav, that the Beis Hamikdash was made with gold. And she's out, Vashti's out. Who replaces her? Ya'aleh hadas, the one referred to as hadas. She's the one who is now the better one. Zo Esther at Tzadekes shenikres Hadassah, and we know she was nikres Hadassah because the pasuk reads shene'emar vahi omein es Hadassah, that Mordechai raised Hadassah. What does the rest of the pasuk mean? V'hayola Hashem l'shem. Zo mikromikala, Hashem's name will be brought forth by the reading of the Megillah. La'osalam lo yikares. What does it mean that this sign will never stop from the Jewish people? Elu yimei Purim, that even the Mos HaMashiach, we're still going to have Purim. Next, 10, 12 lines from the bottom, on Yud Amud Beis, says that we're going to wrap up to the top of the Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, and then we're going to stop. Says the Gemara as follows: He would start talking about Megillah Esther with the following drasha. The pasuk reads, just like Hashem is joyous when He is doing good for you. He's also joyous when He does bad for you. Says the Gemara, that's impossible. There's no way that Hashem could be happy for having done bad to the Jews. The Gemara says, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu really happy? Chadi means happy with the downfall of the evil. That's not possible. The pasuk reads, when those were going out in the army, there was some singing that was taking place, some chanting. What did they chant? They said, Hodu Lashem ki le'olam chasto. What's missing? The words are made. Why doesn't it say kitov? To show us that there's no possible way that Hashem could be smiling down on us when things are bad. That's source number one that rejects this basic understanding of the pasuk that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was trying to teach, that Hashem is happy with mapalos and shel rishayim. That's not true. And not only that, again, with the very, very wide lines right after the Tosfos. Rav Yochanan.
These wicked Jews or wicked general?
What?
Are these wicked Jews or wicked?
It says it seems to be on the Jews, because the pasuk reads just like he does. He's happy when he does good for you, which the Chorah is talking about Jews. But that's a good question. What pasuk is this talking about? Yeah, it's a pasuk in Dvarim. Seems to be. So that's what the Gemara says. And then the first long line for the second time, 8 lines, 7 lines from the bottom. We're going to bring another proof that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like the Mapalos and Shel Tzadikim. It actually might be both, Michael, because of this raya. What happened that night by Yitzias Mitzrayim? You had the water on one side, the Jews in the middle, and you had the Mitzrayim on the outside. So Bikshu Malachi Ashar Slomar Shira. They wanted to say Shira once all the Mitzrayim started dying. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ma'aseh Yodai Tovim Bayam Latim Omim Shira. Famous retort. But how can you say that you're going to say Shira? What the Malachim were saying was unacceptable. If the Malachim were saying that that people are going to die. How can you say shiur? Hashem says that's just not polite. So we see that that's definitely not what Hashem wanted. Amar Rabbi Elazar, hu eino sas ela acherim mesis. He's not the one who's happy, but others are happy, and this is actually meduyak in the pasuk. V'dekanami, because the pasuk read d'chsiv kein yasis, that he enables others to be happy. V'lo chsiv yasus, that he is happy. Shema mina, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not happy. B'mapalos and shel tzadikim. Rabbi Abba Bar Kana pasach la pischa la parsha samehacha. He would start giving drushes on Megillah Esther in the following way: La'adam shetov lefanav, for a man that's good before him, nasan chachma v'das v'simcha. He would give him wisdom and knowledge and happiness. Zeh, that pasuk refers to Mordechai Tzaddik. What about the next pasuk, or the next part of the pasuk? V'lachote nasan an inyan le'esof le'chnos. Zeh Haman, he was doing terrible things. Laseis latov. That was the good things that they were doing. That he took over the house, but they were working together. 2 lines from the bottom, our 5th example of a shiur that was given by someone, Rabba Bar Ofran, a unique name in the Gemara. He would speak about Megillah Esther as follows: V'samti kisi be'elam. What does it mean that there would be lost from their kings and officers? Melech zo Vashti, she was a part of the kingship. V'sarim zo Haman ve'aseres banav, that Haman and all 10 of his sons would die. The last one for tonight, Rav Dimi Bar Yitzchak pasach lapischa lahai parsha samehacha, top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, ki avodim anachnu uve'avdoseinu lo azavnu Elokeinu. We did not leave Hashem, we're your servants. Vayete leinu aleinu chesed, you extended chesed upon us. Lifnei malchei pras. Amosai, when was this? Says the Gemara, Bizman Haman. This was during the time Malchei Paras. That was when Hashem extended kindness to us. Things looked very murky. Things looked pretty gloomy, but Hashem saved us. We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem, tomorrow we'll pick up 3 lines from the top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph and learn a blot and a half. Wishing you all a beautiful night.